Naomi's hands shook as every eye in the ballroom turned toward her, Marcelo's voice carrying across the crystal-filled silence. Look at her, still the same pathetic girl who couldn't keep a man. She stood frozen in her designer dress, drowning in shame, until she heard the deep, familiar voice behind her. That's my wife you're speaking about. Welcome back to Powder Room Tales. If you're new, hit subscribe and join our family. Tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? Washington, New York, London? Wherever you are, may peace and favor follow you today. Now let's dive into the story. The silk dress felt like armor, but Naomi Floyd's hands betrayed her as she adjusted the deep emerald fabric for the fifth time. The mirror in her bedroom reflected a successful woman, owner of the city's most prestigious art gallery, wearing a designer gown that cost more than she used to make in a month. But inside, she was still that 22-year-old girl who'd packed her easel away forever because Marcelo had laughed at her childish dreams. "You don't have to go," she whispered to her reflection, the same words she'd been repeating for weeks. The invitation lay on her vanity like a challenge. Westfield High School 15-year reunion. 15 years since graduation. 15 years since she'd believed Marcelo Flynn when he said she was lucky he loved someone so unrealistic. 7 years since their divorce. 2 years since she'd married Ricardo Sanford in a quiet ceremony that felt like the first real moment of her life. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "Final numbers for the Morrison exhibition look incredible. You've built something amazing, Naomi." She smiled, remembering how Ricardo had commissioned that first piece, an abstract representation of technological innovation that somehow needed to feel human. Most tech moguls wanted cold, sterile art that matched their offices, but Ricardo had sat in her gallery for hours asking about colors and emotions, about how art could bridge the gap between logic and feeling. "I don't understand art," he admitted on that first night, his usually confident demeanor softening as he studied her paintings. "But I understand passion. And yours? It's extraordinary." 3 months of late-night conversations about creativity and purpose. 6 months before their first kiss in front of a painting she'd titled Vulnerability. A year before he'd proposed with a vintage ring saying he wanted something with history, with story, like her art. Now, staring at herself in the mirror, Naomi touched the simple gold band on her finger, the only jewelry she ever needed. They'd kept their marriage private, partly for Ricardo's security concerns, mostly because their love felt too precious to expose to public scrutiny. But tonight, facing her past alone, she wondered if secrecy was really protection or just another form of hiding. 23 floors above the city, Ricardo Sanford stood at his office windows watching traffic move like blood cells through the urban arteries below. The quarterly reports spread across his desk showed another record-breaking period for Sanford Technologies, but his attention kept drifting to the photograph tucked between his monitors. Naomi laughing in her gallery, paint somehow smudged on her cheek despite wearing her professional blazer. She'd been different when they met, guarded, apologetic for taking up his time as if her expertise wasn't worth his attention. It had taken months to understand why, how someone had systematically convinced her that her gifts were worthless, that her dreams were naive indulgences. Ricardo's jaw tightened, remembering the night Naomi had finally told him about Marcelo, how he'd isolated her from friends, mocked her art in front of others, made her feel grateful for his tolerance of her hobbies. The way she'd flinched when Ricardo first called her work brilliant, as if waiting for the punchline. "Sir," his assistant's voice came through the intercom, "the Tokyo call has been moved to tomorrow. You're clear for the evening." Ricardo glanced at his watch. 7:30. Naomi's reunion started at 8. He'd wanted to go with her, to stand beside her as she faced whatever ghosts were waiting at Westfield High, but she'd insisted on going alone, something about proving to herself that she could. He understood independence, he'd built his empire on it, but he also understood love, and love meant wanting to shield her from any more pain. His phone showed 3 draft messages he'd typed and deleted. "How are you feeling? Call if you need anything. I'm proud of you." All true, all inadequate. Ricardo had learned emotional distance early. Parents too busy building their own careers to notice their son building walls. Business school taught him that vulnerability was a liability. The tech world reinforced that emotions were inefficiencies to be optimized away. Then, Naomi had walked into his life with paint under her fingernails and passion in her voice, talking about how art could make people feel things they didn't even know they needed to feel. She'd looked at his corporate headquarters and seen not success, but emptiness. "It's beautiful," she'd said diplomatically, then added with devastating honesty, "but where do you go to remember you're human?" That question had haunted him for months. Now, watching the city lights flicker to life, he knew the answer: anywhere she was. His reflection in the window showed a man who'd conquered markets but was still learning to conquer fear. The fear that loving someone meant losing control, meant risking everything he'd built. Naomi deserved better than a husband who loved her in private and professional silence in public. Ricardo's phone rang, Naomi's ringtone. "Hey," he answered softly. "I'm leaving now." Her voice was steady, but he could hear the tremor underneath. "I just wanted to hear your voice." "You're going to be magnificent," he said, meaning it. "You always are." A pause. "Ricardo?" "Yeah?" "I love you. Not because you're successful or powerful or any of that. I love you because you see me, the real me." The words hit him harder than any business victory ever had. "I love you too. All of you. Every stubborn, talented, beautiful part." After she hung up, Ricardo stood alone in his office, city lights reflecting off glass and steel. Somewhere across town, the woman he loved was walking into a room full of people who'd known her before she bloomed, who might still see her as the girl who'd let someone clip her wings. A text from his head of security popped up, confirming no public appearances scheduled tonight. Ricardo stared at the message for a long moment, then he grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator. Some things were more important than privacy. The Grand Marquis Ballroom sparkled like a jewel box, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across marble floors that reflected the laughter of 200 former classmates. Naomi moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her emerald dress catching the light as she reconnected with faces from another lifetime. "Naomi Floyd, oh my God, you look incredible." Jessica Chan, now Jessica Martinez, pulled her into a warm embrace. "I heard you own an art gallery now. That's amazing." "Thank you." Naomi's smile felt more natural than she'd expected. "The Morrison Gallery downtown. We just opened a new exhibition featuring emerging local artists." "That sounds so sophisticated," chimed in David Park, appearing with 2 glasses of champagne. "I always knew you'd do something creative. Remember how you used to sketch during lunch breaks?" Naomi accepted the champagne, surprised by the genuine warmth in his voice. "You remember that?" "Of course. You drew that portrait of Mrs. Henderson that made her cry because it was so beautiful. We were all jealous of your talent." For the first time in weeks, Naomi felt her shoulders relax. Maybe this wouldn't be the disaster she'd imagined. These people remembered her art fondly, not as the ridiculous hobby Marcelo had always called it. "So tell us," Jessica leaned in conspiratorially, "are you seeing anyone? Married? We're all dying to know what happened after you disappeared from social media." Naomi's wedding ring felt warm against her finger, hidden beneath her evening gloves. "I'm very happy, very private about my personal life these days." "Smart woman," David nodded approvingly. "After what happened with, well, look who decided to show her face." The voice cut through the ambient conversation like a blade through silk. Naomi's champagne glass trembled in her grip as she turned, already knowing what she'd find.
Marcelo Flynn stood 10 feet away, his arm wrapped possessively around a blonde woman who couldn't be older than 25. His smile was the same predatory grin that used to make her stomach clench during their marriage, the one that meant he'd found something to attack. "Marcelo?" Naomi's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Hello. Don't you look polished?" His eyes raked over her dress with calculated assessment. "Finally learned how to dress like a grown-up, I see. Though I suppose someone had to teach you eventually." Jessica and David shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension crackling between them. Other conversations nearby began to quiet as heads turned toward the brewing confrontation. "This is Brittany," Marcelo continued, his voice rising just enough to draw more attention. "My fiancée. Brittany, this is Naomi, my ex-wife, the one I told you about." Brittany giggled nervously, clearly uncomfortable with being used as a prop. "Nice to meet you." "Lovely," Naomi managed, her throat feeling tight. Marcelo's grin widened. "Brittany's a pharmaceutical sales rep, very successful, very practical, not like some people who waste their time on artistic pursuits." The words landed exactly where it aimed them, straight into the scar tissue of old wounds. Naomi felt 15 years of healing begin to crack. "Your gallery is beautiful, Naomi," David said quickly, trying to redirect the conversation. "Oh, you have a little art shop now? How adorable. Still playing with your paints, I see. Some things never change." "It's not a shop," Jessica said sharply. "It's one of the most prestigious galleries in the city." "Sure it is." Marcelo's tone dripped condescension. "I'm sure it's very quaint, very Naomi. Remember how she used to stay up all night working on those little pictures, completely obsessed like a child with finger paints?" Heat flooded Naomi's cheeks. Around them, more people had stopped to listen, drawn by the spectacle of public humiliation. They could feel their curious eyes, their whispered recognition. "That's Marcelo Flynn and his ex-wife. Remember how messy their divorce was?" "Those paintings were beautiful," David said firmly, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. "Beautiful," Marcelo laughed again, the sound echoing off the marble walls. "Is that what we're calling delusions now? I spent 6 years trying to help her understand reality, that art is a hobby, not a career, that some people are meant to be practical, not chase impossible dreams." Naomi's hands were shaking now. The champagne glass felt slippery in her grip. "I tried to save her from disappointment," Marcelo continued, his voice growing louder, more performative. "Tried to teach her that the world doesn't owe anyone a living for playing pretend, but she never could accept the truth about herself." "Marcelo, stop." The words came out as a whisper. "Stop what? Telling the truth? Look at her, still the same girl who thought the world would bow down to her precious talent, still living in a fantasy where she matters." The ballroom had grown almost silent now, conversations dying as people turned to watch the unfolding drama. Naomi felt exposed under the crystal light, pinned like a butterfly in a display case. "She was always too sensitive," Marcelo said to Brittany, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Couldn't handle honest feedback, cried whenever I tried to help her see reality. Some people just can't be saved from themselves." Naomi's vision blurred at the edges. This was her nightmare made real, public humiliation in front of everyone who'd known her before she'd found her strength, before she'd discovered her worth. "At least tell me you finally found someone desperate enough to put up with the drama." Marcelo's eyes glittered with malicious curiosity. "Or are you still alone, painting your feelings away in that little art shop?" The question hung in the air like poison gas. Naomi opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself, to say something, anything, but no words came. The weight of 200 stairs pressed down on her shoulders, crushing the confidence she'd spent years building. Marcelo's smile turned triumphant as he sensed her weakness. "Still the same Naomi. All that polish, all that pretense, but underneath, still the broken little girl who needed me to take care of her." Something inside Naomi's chest cracked. The successful gallery owner, the confident businesswoman, the beloved wife, all of it seemed to dissolve under Marcelo's relentless assault. She was 22 again, apologizing for dreaming, grateful for scraps of approval, convinced she was asking by existing.
The champagne glass slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sound like breaking dreams. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel had been transformed into a monument to nostalgia. Twinkling lights draped from the ceiling like captured stars, round tables adorned with centerpieces of white roses and gold ribbons, and a slideshow projecting yearbook photos onto the walls. Naomi had spent the first hour in a cocoon of warmth, reconnecting with Sarah Chen from AP Art and Marcus Williams, who'd sat behind her in calculus, laughing about teachers they'd feared and dreams they'd chased. "Naomi Floyd!" Jessica Martinez had squealed, pulling her into a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and wine. "Look at you! I heard you own that gorgeous gallery on 5th Street. We drive past it all the time. Always wondered who had such incredible taste." For those precious 60 minutes, Naomi had felt like herself. Not the broken girl Marcelo had shaped, not the woman still fighting for her own worth, but simply Naomi, someone who'd built something beautiful from the ashes of her old dreams. Then Marcelo Flynn walked in. He looked older, softer around the middle, his once thick hair now carefully styled to hide the recession. But his smile, that practiced, predatory smile that had once made her feel chosen, remained unchanged. The woman beside him couldn't be more than 25, blonde and doe-eyed, wearing a dress that cost more than it covered. "Well, well," Marcelo's voice carried across the conversation as he approached her table, his arm possessively around his companion's waist. "Naomi Floyd. Still going by Floyd, I see." The name hit like a slap. She'd kept it after the divorce, not out of sentiment, but out of defiance. Refusing to go back to her maiden name felt like refusing to erase the lessons she'd learned. But the way he said it, with that subtle smirk, made it sound like evidence of failure. "Hello, Marcelo." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Everyone, this is my ex-wife," he announced to the table with theatrical magnanimity, as if you were presenting a museum exhibit. "Naomi and I had quite the passionate little romance back in the day. Didn't we, sweetheart?" The endearment crawled over her skin like ice. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Marcus cleared his throat. "I heard you have an art gallery now," Marcelo continued, his tone dripping with the same condescension she remembered. "That's wonderful, really. It's so important to have hobbies." The word landed exactly as he intended. Hobbies. Not career, not calling, not the business she'd built from nothing into one of the city's most respected galleries. Hobbies. "It's actually quite successful," Sarah interjected loyally. But Marcelo's attention had already shifted. "And what about your personal life?" His eyes glittered with malicious curiosity. "I know how challenging relationships can be for you." Naomi's chest tightened. He was doing it again, that surgical precision with which he'd always dismantled her confidence. In public, with witnesses, using their shared history as a weapon. "That's really none of your business, Marcelo." "Oh, come now. We're all friends here." He gestured expansively to their former classmates, most of whom were studying their drinks with uncomfortable intensity. "I'm just concerned about you. You always were so—" He paused, as if searching for the kindest word. "Particular about trust, after what happened with us." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. That she was difficult, damaged. That their marriage had failed because she was broken, not because he'd spent 3 years systematically destroying her self-worth. Naomi felt the familiar paralysis creeping up her spine, that terrible freeze response that had kept her trapped for so long. Her throat closed. Her hands trembled in her lap. Around the table, conversations had died, replaced by the awful weight of public scrutiny. "I should go check on something," she managed, starting to rise. "Oh, don't run away," Marcelo laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Remember, everyone, Naomi never could handle direct conversation about difficult topics."
He was rewriting history in real time, turning her self-preservation into character weakness, her healing into pathology. The worst part was the flicker of recognition she saw in some faces, classmates nodding slightly, as if remembering her as fragile, unstable, the girl who left parties early and avoided confrontation. "Marcelo, maybe we should—" his young girlfriend began nervously. "No, it's fine," he waved her off. "Naomi knows I only want what's best for her. Don't you, darling? That's why our marriage didn't work out. I kept trying to help her grow up, face reality, but she preferred to live in her little fantasy world of paint and canvas." Each word was precisely chosen, designed to sound caring to observers while cutting deep into wounds only he knew how to find. Naomi's breathing became shallow. The room felt too small, too bright, too full of eyes that saw her as that same girl who'd been too sensitive, too dramatic, too much.
Her phone buzzed against her thigh, probably Ricardo, checking on her, but she couldn't move to answer it, couldn't risk Marcelo seeing the text, couldn't bear to drag the one pure thing in her life into this toxic performance. "I think," she said carefully, each word costing her, "you should focus on your own evening, Marcelo." "There she is." He clapped his hands together as if she'd performed a trick. "Still the same Naomi. Can't take a little friendly concern without getting defensive. Some things never change." The conversation around them had resumed in stilted bursts, everyone pretending not to witness the slow-motion emotional assassination taking place at table 7. Naomi felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller with each casual cruelty, each perfectly delivered poison wrapped in the guise of concern. Her phone buzzed again, then again. "Popular tonight," Marcelo observed, gesturing toward her clutch. "Or are you one of those people who texts themselves for attention? You always did need so much validation." The accusation was so absurd, so precisely calculated to make her doubt her own reality, that Naomi almost gasped. This was how he'd always operated, taking her reactions to his abuse and weaponizing them as evidence of her instability. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against marble. "Excuse me." "Of course," Marcelo called after her as she walked toward the restroom, his voice carrying just far enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Take all the time you need. We'll be here when you're ready to rejoin the adult conversation." The laughter that followed her retreat wasn't malicious, just uncomfortable chuckles from people who didn't know what else to do. But it might as well have been a chorus of judgment, confirming everything Marcelo had implied about her character, her weakness, her inability to handle real life. In the marble and gold restroom, Naomi gripped the edge of the sink and stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked successful, composed, strong, but underneath, she could feel that 22-year-old girl scratching at the surface, the one who'd believed she was lucky to be loved by someone like Marcelo Flynn. Her phone showed 3 missed texts from Ricardo. "How's it going? Thinking about you. Call when you can." She started to type a response, then stopped. How could she explain that she was falling apart in a hotel bathroom because her ex-husband was publicly dissecting her character? How could she admit that after all this time, all this growth, all this success, she was still vulnerable to his particular brand of psychological warfare? The bathroom door opened and Sarah Chen stepped in, her face creased with concern. "Hey," she said softly, "you okay?" Naomi forced a smile. "Fine, just needed a minute." "He's—" Sarah searched for words. "Different than I remembered?" "He hasn't changed at all," and the truth of it hit her like a physical blow. Marcelo hadn't changed. She had. She'd built a life, found love, created success from the ruins he'd left behind. But somehow, in his presence, all that progress felt as fragile as tissue paper.
You know you don't have to go back out there, Sarah said gently. We could leave, get coffee, talk about anything else. The offer was tempting. Escape, avoid confrontation, protect herself from further damage. It was exactly what the old Naomi would have done, what Marcelo expected her to do. But that would mean he'd won again, that 15 years later he could still make her run. No, Naomi said, straightening her shoulders. I'm not running anymore. The words felt braver than she did, but sometimes she'd learned that courage wasn't about feeling strong. Sometimes it was about showing up anyway, even when your hands shook and your heart hammered and every instinct screamed retreat. She touched up her lipstick with steady hands and walked back toward the ballroom, toward the man who'd once convinced her she was nothing, ready to prove, to him, to herself, to everyone, exactly how wrong he'd been. The crystal chandelier above the Grandview Hotel ballroom cast fractured light across marble floors, but Naomi felt like she was drowning in shadows. The reunion dinner had been announced, and escape routes were systematically closing around her like a cage. Ladies and gentlemen, please find your assigned tables. Dinner will be served momentarily. Naomi's heart sank as she located her name card, Table 7, directly adjacent to Table 6, where Marcelo had strategically positioned himself. The seating arrangements, alphabetical by maiden name, felt like a cosmic joke. Floyd and Flynn, forever linked by cruel coincidence.
Well, well, Marcelo's voice carried easily across the small distance between tables as guests settled into their seats. Naomi, you remember my fiancée, Stephanie. He gestured to the 25-year-old blonde beside him, her engagement ring catching the light like a weapon. Steph, this is the ex-wife I told you about, the one with all those artistic aspirations. The word aspirations dripped with condescension, and Naomi felt every eye at both tables turn toward her. Her tablemates, former classmates she barely remembered, shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but unsure whether to intervene or watch the drama unfold. "Hello, Marcelo," Naomi managed, her voice steadier than her hands. She nodded politely to Stephanie, who looked her up and down with undisguised curiosity. "She had this little hobby," Marcelo continued, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Used to paint all the time, made quite a mess of our apartment." His laugh was sharp, familiar, designed to cut. "I kept telling her she needed to focus on reality, you know? Get a real job. But some people just can't let go of childhood fantasies." Naomi's fingers found her wedding ring beneath the table, spinning it slowly, a habit she'd developed whenever anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. The simple gold band felt like an anchor, reminding her that she wasn't that broken girl anymore. But surrounded by the ghosts of her past, the reminder felt fragile. "What do you do now, Naomi?" asked Janet Morrison, a former classmate seated to her left. The question was innocent enough, but in the context of Marcelo's pointed comments, it felt loaded with judgment. Before Naomi could answer, Marcelo interjected. "Oh, she's probably still doing the art thing, right? Some people never learn to grow up. I heard through the grapevine that she's working at some little gallery downtown, playing with paintings instead of building a real career." The casual dismissal of her success, reducing the Floyd Gallery, her life's work, to playing with paintings, hit like a physical blow. Several tablemates nodded knowingly, as if Marcelo's assessment confirmed their own assumptions about artistic pursuits. "The Floyd Gallery is actually the thing about Naomi," he said, addressing Stephanie, but speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, "is that she always lived in this fantasy world, never could handle real responsibility. I tried to help her understand practical matters, but—" He shrugged, a gesture that suggested noble efforts wasted on hopeless causes. Stephanie giggled, a sound like breaking glass. "That's so sad. I mean, at some point you have to grow up, right?" The servers began placing salad courses in front of guests,
the clink of china and crystal creating a soundtrack to Naomi's humiliation. She stared at the arugula on her plate, each tears threatened to surface. I always wondered what happened to you after the divorce. I mean, starting over at 30 must have been challenging? It was actually quite liberating, she said quietly. But her words were lost as Marcelo launched into an elaborate story about his recent promotion at the insurance firm, his voice commanding attention from both tables. As he spoke, Naomi found herself trapped in a horrible déjà vu. This was exactly how their marriage had been. Marcelo's voice filling every space, his narratives reshaping reality until her truth became invisible. She remembered dinner parties where she'd sat silently as he, jokingly, told guests about her little art projects, how he'd trained her to smile and nod as he redefined her dreams as delusions. The salad course gave way to the main course, herb-crested salmon that might as well have been cardboard for all Naomi could taste it. Around her, conversations flowed about careers and children, mortgages and marriages, but she felt suspended outside of it all, watching through glass. "So, Naomi," said David Chen from across the table, clearly trying to include her in the discussion, "are you married? Kids?" The simple question created a moment of perfect silence. Naomi's breath caught. Here was her chance to claim her truth, to speak about Ricardo, about the love that had healed her wounds and helped her rebuild her life into something beautiful. But Marcelo's eyes were on her, waiting, and she could see the trap he'd laid. If she mentioned Ricardo, he'd demand details. Where did they meet? What does he do? Why isn't he here? And when she couldn't produce him, couldn't offer proof of her happiness, he'd twist her silence into evidence of deception. She started, then stopped. The weight of explaining Ricardo, their private marriage, his absence, the complexity of their life together, felt impossible under Marcelo's predatory gaze. "She's always been a bit secretive about her personal life. You know, some people like to keep their business close to the vest, especially when there isn't much business to speak of." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Naomi felt the familiar shame creeping up her spine, the same feeling she'd battled throughout their marriage, the sense that her truth was somehow less valid than his fiction.
Her phone buzzed against her purse. A text notification. Her heart jumped, hoping it was Ricardo, but she couldn't check without drawing more attention to herself. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator announced, "we'll be starting our program shortly with a special presentation about our graduating class achievements." Achievements. Naomi almost laughed at the bitter irony. Here she sat, owner of one of the city's most successful galleries, married to a man who saw her as the most beautiful thing in his world, yet feeling smaller than she had in years. Marcelo raised his wine glass in a mock toast. "Here's to old friends," he said, his eyes fixed on Naomi with satisfaction, "and to seeing how everyone turned out." As glasses clinked around both tables, Naomi realized with growing horror that this was only the beginning. The program, the dancing, the late-night reminiscing. She was trapped here for hours yet, pinned like a butterfly in Marcelo's collection, displayed for his entertainment and everyone else's judgment. The chandelier light felt harsh now, exposing instead of illuminating. And somewhere across the city, Ricardo was working late in his office, unaware that the woman he loved was drowning in plain sight. Have you ever felt trapped in a situation where someone from your past tried to define who you are now? How did you find your voice in that moment? The hardest battles are often the ones we fight in silence. Share this if you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people who think they know your story. Sometimes we all need a reminder that our truth matters. The hotel bar's dim lighting couldn't hide the tremor in Naomi's hands as she gripped her untouched martini. She'd escaped the ballroom after Marcelo's latest verbal assault, but his words followed her like smoke. Still playing pretend, I see. Some people never learn they're not meant for bigger things. Naomi. She turned to find Jessica Chen, her old study partner, sliding into the adjacent booth. Jessica's designer suit and confident posture spoke of success, but her eyes held genuine concern. I saw what happened in there. Marcelo hasn't changed much, has he? No, he hasn't. You know, I always wondered why you stopped painting senior year. You were so talented. Remember that portrait series you did? Everyone said you'd be famous someday. The memory hit like a physical blow. Spring of senior year. The art scholarship to Savannah College. Her portfolio spread across their tiny apartment table while 18-year-old Marcelo paced behind her. 15 years earlier. This is ridiculous, Naomi. Marcelo's voice carried that particular tone she'd learned to dread. Disappointment mixed with condescension. You're going to throw away a practical future for what? Playing with paints? She looked up from the acceptance letter in her hands, the full scholarship offer that represented everything she'd ever dreamed of. It's not playing, Mark. This is my chance. To what? Starve? Live in some crappy studio apartment hoping someone might buy your little pictures? He sat beside her, taking her hands in his voice softening to that manipulative gentleness that somehow hurt worse than anger. Baby, I love how creative you are. It's adorable, but we're adults now. We're getting married after graduation. I'm starting at my dad's firm, and we can have a real life together. But the scholarship would take you away from me, from us. His grip tightened. Is that what you want? To abandon everything we've built for some fantasy? She stared at her paintings, portraits of their classmates that seemed to breathe with life, landscapes that captured not just images but emotions. Mrs. Rodriguez, her art teacher, had called her work transcendent. The scholarship committee had used words like exceptional and promising. But Marcelo's thumb was stroking over her engagement ring, the modest band that had felt so grown up when he'd proposed junior year. I've wanted this since I was little, Mark. And I've wanted you since sophomore year. Doesn't that count for something? His eyes filled with tears she'd never seen before. Naomi, my dad's already planning to give us the down payment for a house. My mom's been looking at wedding venues. Are you really going to break up our family's dreams because you can't let go of kid stuff? The weight of everyone's expectations settled on her shoulders like lead. Marcelo's parents, who'd welcomed her into their family when her own had struggled. Their friends called them the perfect couple. Her mother, who had been so proud when Naomi got engaged, said, "Finally, some stability." She looked at the scholarship letter again, then at Marcelo's pleading face. I don't want to be selfish.
You're not selfish, baby. You're just young. But you're about to be my wife, and wives don't abandon their husbands for impossible dreams. That night, she'd written the rejection letter to the Savannah College. By morning, she'd packed away her easel, her brushes, her half-finished paintings. Marcelo had kissed her forehead and called her my practical girl. For 7 years of marriage, she'd worked as a receptionist at his father's law firm, coming home to cook dinner while Marcelo talked about his cases, his ambitions, his future. Their future, he'd say, though somehow it only ever included his dreams. When she'd timidly suggested taking a community art class in their 5th year of marriage, he laughed. Still hung up on that? Naomi, we're trying to save for a house. Don't waste money on hobbies. When she'd shown him a watercolor she'd painted in secret, a sunset from their honeymoon, he'd glanced at it and said, "It's nice, I guess. Very amateur. Good thing you didn't waste college on this." Amateur. The word had echoed in her head for months.
Naomi. Jessica's voice pulled her back to the present. You okay? Naomi blinked, realizing tears were sliding down her cheeks. I gave up art school for him. Full scholarship. I was 18 and thought love meant sacrifice. Jessica's expression softened with understanding. And now? Now I own 3 galleries and represent artists whose work hang in museums. Now I'm married to someone who commissioned me to create a piece that meant something to him, who sits in my gallery for hours just to watch me work. Then why does Marcelo still get to you? Before Naomi could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Ricardo. How are you holding up? She stared at the message, remembering their first real conversation about her past. They'd been dating for 4 months when he'd noticed her hesitation to call herself an artist. 2 years earlier. I run galleries, Naomi had corrected when Ricardo introduced her to his business partner as the brilliant artist I was telling you about. Later, alone in her apartment, Ricardo had asked, Why do you do that? Do what? Minimize your talent. You've shown me your work. It's extraordinary. But you always introduce yourself as a gallery owner first, artist second, if at all. Naomi had busied herself making tea, avoiding his eyes. Because gallery ownership is my business. Art is just personal. Who told you it was just anything? The question had stopped her cold. When she'd finally told him about Marcelo, about the scholarship, about 7 years of being called amateur, Ricardo had been quiet for a long time. Then he'd said, Show me everything you didn't paint because of him. What do you mean? The portraits you never finished, the landscapes you never attempted, the dreams you never pursued. I want to commission them all. Ricardo, that's impossible. No. Impossible was letting someone convince you that your gifts were weaknesses. Impossible was staying married to someone who couldn't see your light. But you left. You rebuilt. You're here and you're magnificent. That night, for the first time in over a decade, Naomi had painted until sunrise. Naomi? Jessica was still waiting for an answer. He gets to me because for 7 years I believed him, and there's still a part of me that wonders if the 18-year-old who gave up her dreams was right to be practical. Jessica leaned forward. Can I tell you something? I went to your gallery opening last month. I saw your latest series, those abstract emotions pieces. Standing in front of them, I felt things I didn't even know I could feel. You didn't just become an artist because of Marcelo. You became the artist you were always meant to be. Naomi's phone buzzed again. Another message from Ricardo. Whatever you're thinking right now, remember, you are not the girl who settled. You are the woman who rose. As if he knew exactly what she needed to hear.
Jessica, Naomi said slowly, can I ask you something? If you could go back and tell your 18-year-old self one thing, what would it be? Jessica smiled. That the people who try to make you smaller are already smaller than you'll ever be, and that dreams deferred aren't dreams denied. Sometimes they're just dreams that needed you to grow into them. Naomi felt something shift inside her chest, like a painting finally coming into focus. She stood, smoothing her dress, and looked back toward the ballroom where music was starting for the dinner portion of the evening. I think, she said quietly, it's time I stopped letting a ghost from my past haunt my present. But as she walked back toward the ballroom, Naomi had no idea that Ricardo was already in the hotel, having made his own decision about ghosts and the woman he loved more than his own privacy. The confrontation that would change everything was only minutes away. The ladies' restroom felt like a sanctuary, its marble surfaces cool against Naomi's flushed cheeks. She gripped the edge of the sink, staring at her reflection, the same face Marcelo had spent 3 years convincing was average at best, now framed by the kind of elegant styling that came with success and self-respect. You are not that girl anymore, she told herself, the words Ricardo had whispered against her temple on their wedding night.
You are not his victim. The bathroom door opened, and Jennifer Walsh, her old lab partner from chemistry, entered with a concerned expression. "Naomi, are you okay? That was intense out there." "I'm fine," Naomi said automatically, then caught herself. She'd spent too many years pretending to be fine when she wasn't. "Actually, no, I'm not fine, but I'm going to be." Jennifer moved to the sink beside her, pulling out lipstick with the casual efficiency of a woman who had learned to touch up her makeup during difficult conversations. Marcelo always was a piece of work. Even in high school, he had this way of making people feel small so he could feel big. "You remember that?" "Honey, everyone remembers that. We just didn't know how to call it what it was back then." Jennifer met her eyes in the mirror. "But look at you now. Sarah Morrison told me about your gallery. She said you represent some of the most important emerging artists in the country." Naomi felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot that had lived there since Marcelo's first cruel word tonight. "I do. I really do." "And are you happy?" For the first time all evening, Naomi's smile felt genuine. "I'm happy. I have someone who—" She paused, thinking of Ricardo's gentle hands as he helped her hang paintings, the way he listened when she explained the emotional resonance of color choices, how he'd learned to see beauty through her eyes. "I have someone who believes in me." Good, because that man out there doesn't deserve a single second more of your headspace. After Jennifer left, Naomi remained alone with her reflection. Slowly, she began to see herself as Ricardo saw her, not through Marcelo's distorted lens of criticism and control, but through eyes that had learned to recognize art, beauty, strength. She remembered their first real conversation, when Ricardo had studied one of her paintings for nearly an hour before asking, "What were you feeling when you painted this?" "Trapped," she answered honestly, surprising herself. "And now? Now I paint freedom." He'd bought that painting, not for his office, but for his bedroom, so he could wake up to her vision of liberation every morning. The memory gave her strength. She straightened her shoulders, adjusting the emerald dress that Ricardo had insisted brought out the gold flecks in her eyes. He'd been right, of course. He saw details about her that she'd forgotten existed. When she returned to the ballroom, the energy had shifted. People were clustering in smaller groups, the evening moving toward its natural conclusion. She spotted Marcelo across the room, still holding court with his new girlfriend and a small audience, his voice carrying that familiar tone of false authority. "There she is," called out David Chen, her old art class partner. "Naomi, I was just telling everyone about your gallery. My wife dragged me to that exhibition you curated last month, the one about urban renewal. It was incredible." Others gathered around, and for the first time tonight, Naomi felt the conversation flow naturally. She found herself laughing at David's self-deprecating jokes about his complete lack of artistic taste, explaining her curatorial philosophy to Lisa Martinez, who'd always been interested in creative careers but had gone into accounting instead. "Do you ever miss the corporate world? I mean, being your own boss must be terrifying sometimes."
Terrifying, Naomi admitted. For the first year, I woke up every morning convinced I'd made a terrible mistake. But then I realized fear of failure was nothing compared to the fear of never trying. The words felt powerful in her mouth, true in a way that surprised her. She'd grown so accustomed to hiding her professional success, downplaying her achievements, that she'd forgotten how good it felt to own them. "That's beautiful," murmured Rachel Kim, another former classmate. "I wish I had that kind of courage." "You do," Naomi said with certainty. "We all do. Sometimes we just need the right person to help us remember." As the conversation continued, she became aware of Marcello's voice growing louder, more insistent. He was talking about real estate markets and investment strategies, trying to command attention. But people were drifting away from his group toward more genuine conversations. She caught fragments of his desperate attempts. "Closed 3 major deals last month. Looking at expanding into commercial properties. Always said I had an eye for value." The old Naomi would have felt guilty for his obvious discomfort, would have somehow taken responsibility for his need to impress people. But this Naomi, Ricardo's Naomi, her own Naomi, felt only pity. She thought of the text Ricardo had sent earlier. Remember, you're not there to prove anything to anyone. You're there because you chose to be brave. Brave. Yes, she was brave. Brave enough to leave a marriage that was slowly killing her spirit. Brave enough to start over at 30. Brave enough to believe in love again when Ricardo had walked into her gallery with questions about art and stayed for conversations about life. Naomi, David was saying, you should talk to my cousin Marcus. He's starting a nonprofit focused on arts education in underserved communities. I bet you two would have a lot to discuss. I'd love that, she replied, meaning it. This was what she'd forgotten, that connection could be generous, supportive, real, that not every interaction had to be a competition or a test. The warmth in the room felt genuine now, built on shared memories and mutual respect, rather than the performative nostalgia that had dominated earlier conversations. She was laughing at Rachel's story about her teenagers when she became aware of a shift in the room's energy. Marcello's voice had taken on that edge she remembered too well, the tone that meant he felt threatened and was about to make someone else pay for it. Well, well, he said, approaching our group with his girlfriend trailing behind. Look who's finally decided to join the grown-up conversation. The easy warmth around Naomi crystallized into tension. David stepped slightly closer to her, a gesture of subtle support that she appreciated more than he could know. Marcello, she said evenly, drawing on every ounce of strength she'd built over the past 7 years. I have to say, Naomi, you've certainly gotten good at putting on a show. His smile was sharp as broken glass. All these stories about your little art gallery, very impressive fairy tales. She felt the old familiar tightness in her chest, but this time it was accompanied by something new. Anger. Clean, righteous anger at this man who had stolen so many years of her joy. They're not fairy tales, Marcello. They're my life. Your life? Marcello's laugh cut through the ballroom like a blade, drawing the attention of nearby tables. His girlfriend Amber giggled behind her hand, as if she were watching entertainment rather than witnessing cruelty. Your life? Come on, sweetheart. We both know you were never the type to make it on your own. Naomi felt the familiar chill creeping up her spine, but she forced herself to stand straighter. I did make it on my own, Marcello. I rebuilt everything after what? After I stopped carrying you? His voice grew louder, more theatrical. The conversations around them began to die as heads turned toward the commotion. David stepped closer to Naomi's side. Marcello, this isn't the place. Oh, but it is exactly the place, because everyone here remembers how Naomi used to be. Always dreaming, never doing. Always starting projects she couldn't finish. Remember her art phase in high school? How many paintings did you actually complete? 3? 4? Heat flooded Naomi's cheeks. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, could see some of their former classmates shifting uncomfortably, while others leaned in with barely concealed curiosity. That was different, she managed, her voice smaller than she intended. I was young. You were the same then as you were during our marriage, full of big ideas, zero follow-through. I spent 3 years trying to help you become realistic about your limitations.
Jennifer Walsh appeared at Naomi's other side. Marcello, you're being incredibly inappropriate. Inappropriate? I'm being honest. He gestured dramatically toward Naomi. Look at her now, standing there in that expensive dress, pretending to be something she's not. Tell them, Naomi. Tell them about your successful gallery. Tell them how you can afford designer clothes and jewelry when we both know— You don't know anything about my life now, Naomi interrupted, finding a flicker of her earlier strength. Marcello's smile turned predatory. Don't I? Because I did some research before tonight. Very interesting what you can find online these days.
Or should I say, what you can't find? He paused for effect, making sure he had the room's attention. See, a truly successful gallery owner would have a digital footprint, reviews, articles, and social media presence. But Naomi here, practically invisible online, almost like she's hiding something. The blood drained from Naomi's face. She had kept a low profile intentionally, partly for security reasons related to Ricardo's business, partly because she preferred to let her artists take the spotlight. But now, surrounded by staring faces, it looked like exactly what Marcelo was suggesting: deception. There are many reasons someone might maintain privacy, David said firmly, but Naomi could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Privacy or fantasy? Marcelo laughed again. Come on, everyone. This is the same Naomi Floyd who spent her senior year telling everyone she was going to art school in Paris. Remember that? How'd that work out for you, sweetheart? The old shame crashed over her in waves. She'd talked about Paris constantly senior year, had even been accepted to a summer program. But then she'd met Marcelo at graduation, and he'd convinced her that Paris was impractical, that she should stay and build a real life with him instead. I changed my mind about Paris, she whispered. You changed your mind because you finally faced reality, just like you're going to have to face reality now. All these stories about your gallery, about your success. Where's your husband tonight, Naomi? If you're so successful, so happy, where is he? The question hit like a physical blow. Around them, the ballroom had gone almost completely silent, conversation stopping mid-sentence as their former classmates watched the brutal dismantling of someone they'd once known. He's busy, Naomi managed, her voice barely audible. Busy? Right. Or maybe he doesn't exist. Maybe he's just another one of your little fantasies, like the gallery, like the success, like everything else you've been pretending tonight. Amber giggled again, whispering something in Marcelo's ear that made his grin widen. You know what I think? Marcelo's voice carried to every corner of the ballroom now. I think you're the same sad little girl who painted pictures no one wanted to buy. Still making up stories to make yourself feel important. Still... Stop. The word came out as a broken whisper. Still pathetic, Marcelo finished with satisfaction. Look at her, everyone. Still the same girl who couldn't keep a man, couldn't finish what she started, couldn't face the truth about herself. Some people never change. Tears burned behind Naomi's eyes as the walls of the ballroom seemed to close in around her. Every fear she had carried into this room had materialized. Every doubt Marcelo had planted during their marriage was blooming again, fed by the public humiliation and the silence of people who were too uncomfortable to intervene. She could see it in their faces, some pity, some embarrassment, some cruel fascination. The golden success story she'd briefly felt herself becoming crumbled away, leaving her feeling exposed and small and exactly as worthless as Marcelo had always insisted she was. I think, Marcelo said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, it's time for everyone to see who Naomi Floyd really is. Not the fantasy version she's been selling tonight, but the truth. A woman so desperate for validation that she'll lie to a room full of people who used to care about her. The crystal chandelier above her seemed to spin slightly, or maybe that was just her vision blurring with unshed tears. Naomi looked around desperately for an escape route, but every path seemed blocked by staring faces and whispered conversations. Poor Naomi, Amber added sweetly, her voice carrying just far enough to sting. That was the moment something inside Naomi finally broke. Not just cracked, but shattered completely. She felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller until she was nothing but the collection of failures and inadequacies that Marcelo had always insisted she was. The ballroom door was only 20 feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. Her legs felt like water, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She needed to run, needed to hide, needed to disappear before anyone else could witness her complete humiliation. Just as she took a stumbling step toward the exit, she heard the soft whoosh of the ballroom doors opening behind her. And then a voice, calm and authoritative,
cut through the crushing silence like a sword through silk. "Excuse me, I believe you're speaking about my wife." The grand ballroom of the Westfield Hotel had witnessed countless celebrations, but never a moment quite like this. Crystal chandeliers cast their light over frozen faces as Marcelo Flynn's cruel laughter died in his throat. His words, "Look at her, still the same pathetic girl who couldn't keep a man," hanging in the air like poison. Naomi stood paralyzed, her emerald dress suddenly feeling like a costume she had no right to wear. Every eye in the room bore into her, some with pity, others with the hunger for drama that high school reunions seemed to breed. Her champagne glass trembled in her grip as 15 years of carefully built confidence crumbled under the weight of Marcelo's public humiliation. Then she heard it. "That's my wife you're speaking about." The voice was deep, calm, and carried the kind of authority that made conversations stop and heads turn. Naomi's heart nearly burst as she recognized the familiar timbre that had whispered love songs in her ear and talked her through panic attacks at 3 a.m. Ricardo Sanford stood in the ballroom doorway like something out of a dream. 6 feet of quiet power and a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his dark eyes scanning the room with the precision of a man who'd built an empire on reading people and situations. But when his gaze found Naomi's, everything else fell away. The room collectively inhaled. Even those who didn't recognize Ricardo could sense the energy shift, the way the very air seemed to reorganize itself around him. He moved through the crowd with purposeful grace, each step deliberate, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. Marcelo's face had gone pale. "I'm sorry, who are you?" He didn't acknowledge him. Instead, he walked directly to Naomi, his eyes never leaving hers. When he reached her, he gently took her trembling hands in his steady ones, his thumbs brushing across her knuckles in the soothing gesture she knew so well.
"I'm sorry I'm late, love," he said softly, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Traffic was murder. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes, not from shame anymore, but from overwhelming relief and love. "Ricardo, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice was gentle but firm. He turned to face the crowd, keeping one hand protectively on Naomi's lower back. "I believe introductions are in order. I'm Ricardo Sanford, Naomi's husband." A ripple of shocked murmurs spread through the ballroom. Several people pulled out their phones, undoubtedly Googling the name. The tech mogul, the billionaire, the man whose company had revolutionized artificial intelligence, and whose charitable foundation had donated millions to education and arts programs. Marcelo's girlfriend tugged on his sleeve, whispering urgently, "Marcelo, that's Ricardo Sanford. The Ricardo Sanford. He's worth like—" "I know who he is," Marcelo snapped. But his bravado was cracking. The man who'd spent the evening diminishing others suddenly looked very small. Ricardo's attention remained focused on Naomi, but his words carried clearly through the hushed ballroom. "You know, I've been fortunate enough to travel the world, to meet presidents and prime ministers, Nobel laureates and Olympic champions, but I've never met anyone with more courage, more talent, or more heart than my wife." He paused, his thumb tracing the wedding ring on Naomi's finger. 2 years ago, I walked into the Floyd Gallery, thinking I needed a piece of art for my office. What I found was a woman who taught me that success without soul is just expensive emptiness. She showed me that real strength isn't about building walls. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable, to create something beautiful and share it with the world. Naomi's former classmate Jennifer stepped forward, her eyes wide. "Naomi, you own the Floyd Gallery? The one downtown that was featured in Architectural Digest?" "She doesn't just own it," Ricardo said with unmistakable pride. "She built it from nothing. Every artist she represents, every exhibition she curates, every life she touches through art. That's the woman I fell in love with, the woman I'm honored to call my wife." Marcelo made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "That's very touching, but you don't know her like I do,"
She's not as strong as she pretends to be. She needs nothing from you." Ricardo's voice didn't rise, but the steel in it made Marcelo step back. "My wife is the strongest person I know. She survived your attempts to diminish her, rebuilt her life, and created something beautiful in the process. The only pathetic thing in this room is a man so insecure that he has to tear down others to feel important." The silence was deafening. Marcelo's face cycled through red, white, and red again as the implications sank in. Not just that Naomi had found love and success, but that he'd publicly humiliated himself in front of a room full of people who were now looking at him with disgust. Ricardo turned back to Naomi, cupping her face gently in his hands. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. I'm sorry I let you face this alone. You're here now. That's all that matters. I should have been here from the start. No more hiding, Naomi. I don't care who knows about us. I'm proud to be your husband, and I want the whole world to know it." He kissed her then, soft and tender, a public declaration that said more than any speech could. When they parted, Naomi saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before, complete and utter vulnerability. He was choosing her over his privacy, their love over his carefully controlled public image. "Mrs. Sanford, would you do me the honor of dancing with me?" As Ricardo led Naomi to the dance floor, the ballroom erupted in applause. Some clapped for the romance of it all, others for the satisfaction of seeing a bully get his comeuppance, but most clapped for the obvious truth shining in both their faces. This was real love, the kind that conquered fear and shame and the past. Behind them, Marcelo stood alone, his girlfriend having quietly slipped away during Ricardo's speech. For the first time in 15 years, he was forced to confront the truth. He hadn't lost Naomi because she wasn't enough. He'd lost her because he was. When have you had someone stand up for you in a moment when you couldn't stand up for yourself? How did it change the way you saw both them and yourself? Love that conquers fear and shame. Have you experienced a moment like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes we all need someone to remind us of our worth. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath as Ricardo's words echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "That's my wife you're speaking about." Naomi felt the world tilt on its axis. Every conversation stopped. Every champagne glass paused midway to the lips. The reunion, with all its careful social hierarchies and whispered judgments, froze in a moment that would be remembered long after the last dance. Ricardo stepped forward, his presence commanding without being aggressive. He wasn't the cold tech mogul from boardroom photographs. He was a man defending the woman he loved, and that transformation was visible to everyone watching.
"Naomi," he said softly, extending his hand to her. "I'm sorry I'm late." Her fingers trembled as she reached for him, but the moment their hands touched, strength flowed between them. This was real. He was here. The man who had spent 2 years learning to express emotions he'd buried since childhood had just declared their love in front of a room full of strangers. Marcelo's face had gone ashen. "You're married?" he stammered, his earlier bravado crumbling like cheap paint in rain. 2 years next month," Ricardo replied, his arm sliding protectively around Naomi's waist. "To the most extraordinary woman I've ever known." The whispers started then, hushed, urgent conversations as classmates pulled out phones to search Ricardo Sanford and Naomi Floyd. The Forbes articles, the gallery features. The tech empire and the art world are colliding in perfect, impossible harmony. "But she never said," someone whispered. "She kept it private," Ricardo continued, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "Because that's the kind of person she is. She doesn't love status or recognition. She loves with her whole heart, purely and completely." His eyes found Naomi's. She saved me from becoming a man who forgot how to feel. Naomi's chest tightened with overwhelming emotion. This wasn't just about defending her from Marcelo's cruelty. This was Ricardo choosing vulnerability over protection, choosing their love over his carefully constructed walls. "I don't understand," Marcelo's girlfriend interjected, clearly struggling to process this reversal. "She's just... she was nobody in school." "She was never nobody," Ricardo said firmly. "She was waiting to become who she was meant to be, and I was lucky enough to witness that transformation." He turned to face the room, still holding Naomi close. "My wife owns the most prestigious art gallery in the city. She's transformed spaces, changed how people see beauty and meaning. She took everything that was used to hurt her and turned it into strength, into art, into healing for others." Naomi felt tears threatening, but they weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of recognition, of finally being seen and valued for exactly who she was. "The commission that brought us together," Ricardo continued, his voice growing warmer, "was for a piece about innovation needing humanity. I thought I was buying art for my office. Instead, I found the missing piece of my soul." "This is ridiculous," Marcelo snapped, but his voice lacked its earlier venom. He looked smaller now, diminished. "You barely knew her in school. She was always too sensitive, too impractical." "Too real," Ricardo interrupted. "Too genuine for someone who couldn't appreciate authenticity." His gaze settled on Marcelo with quiet authority. "I've read about men like you in business. They tear down others because they're afraid of their own inadequacy. But you made a mistake with Naomi. You tried to convince her she was ordinary when she was extraordinary, and now the whole world can see what you were too blind to recognize." The room erupted in whispered conversations as more people connected the dots. The shy art student who'd married one of the country's most successful entrepreneurs. The woman Marcelo had convinced was not enough, now standing beside someone who clearly believed she was everything. Naomi found her voice at last. "I spent 7 years believing I wasn't worthy of love. Not because I wasn't enough, but because I let someone convince me that dreams and passion and creativity were weaknesses instead of strengths." She looked directly at Marcelo, no longer afraid. "You were wrong about me, about art, about what makes a life valuable. I'm not sorry I left you. I'm sorry I didn't leave sooner." The applause started slowly, one person, then another, building until the entire ballroom was clapping. Not for drama or spectacle, but for recognition. For a woman who'd found her strength, and a man who'd found his heart. Ricardo's thumb traced over her wedding ring. "Would you like to dance, Mrs. Sanford?" The name sent warmth through her entire body, not because of his wealth or status, but because of how he said it. With pride, with love, with the certainty of someone who'd chosen her every day for 2 years and would continue choosing her for the rest of their lives. "I thought you'd never ask, Mr. Sanford." As they moved to the dance floor, the crowd parted naturally. The orchestra, sensing the moment's significance, began playing something soft and romantic. Other couples joined them, but Naomi only saw Ricardo, the man who'd learned to love by watching her create, who'd found his humanity in her art. "Are you okay with this?" she whispered as they swayed together. "Everyone knows?" "I should have done this months ago," he replied, spinning her gently. "I was protecting our privacy, but I was also protecting myself from having to be vulnerable in public, from having to admit that the cold, logical businessman actually believes in fairy tales."
"Do you?" she teased, her earlier shame now completely transformed into joy. "I married an artist who paints dreams into reality," he said, dipping her dramatically as laughter bubbled up from her chest. "If that's not a fairy tale, I don't know what is." As the song ended,
They remained close, forehead to forehead in the center of the dance floor. Around them, their former classmates watched with something like awe, not just at Ricardo's wealth, but at the obvious, deep love between them. Marcelo had disappeared at some point, his cruelty exposed and rendered powerless by the simple truth of two people who'd found each other against all odds. "Ready to go home?" Ricardo asked, though home could be anywhere as long as they were together. "Actually," Naomi said, her smile radiant, "I think I'd like to stay a little longer. I have 15 years of conversations to catch up on, and I'd like them all to know about the amazing man I married." Ricardo's answering smile was worth every moment of vulnerability, every wall he'd torn down, every fear he'd conquered for love. They danced until midnight, no longer hiding, afraid. Two hearts that had learned to beat in perfect rhythm, finally free to love as loudly and proudly as they deserved. As they finally walked toward the exit, hand in hand, Naomi caught sight of a former classmate approaching nervously. "Naomi, I just wanted to say, your gallery opening last year was incredible. My daughter wants to be an artist because of your work. Thank you for not giving up on beauty." And there it was, the real victory. Not the marriage to a billionaire, not the social media posts already spreading across the internet, but the knowledge that her dreams, once mocked and dismissed, now inspired others to dream too. "Never give up on what makes you feel alive," Naomi replied, squeezing Ricardo's hand. "Someone out there is waiting to fall in love with exactly who you're meant to become." Outside, city lights painted the sky in watercolor hues that would inspire her next painting, a piece about love found, dreams reclaimed, and the courage to stand in your truth no matter who's watching. What would it feel like to have someone defend not just your actions, but your very essence and worth? How do you think that kind of love changes a person? This story shows that real love sees and celebrates your authentic self. If this resonates with you, subscribe for more stories about finding your worth and the love you deserve. Share this with someone who needs to remember their value.
You've come to the end of this love story, but another billionaire's secret is waiting. The next tale will be more seductive, more forbidden, and far more addictive. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Until then, guard your heart, because the Powder Room Tales is only getting started.